Hey, Barklord. See, I watched your video on Truman Show. I actually watched it about a week ago, but I liked it a lot, so I thought I would make a video response. Truman Show is one of my favorite films, actually, and I thought Jim Carrey did a really good job in the movie, and so I thought I would make a video response, just kind of about Truman Show. I think there's a lot philosophically going on in Truman Show. I think one of the common themes is first is voyeurism, just because TVs and movies and YouTube itself is voyeuristic. I mean, I like to watch TVs and movies and YouTube, obviously. So I think there's the theme of voyeurism and how we're kind of tend to be pretty passive in our society and not do enough. But I think that's a common theme in Truman Show. But I also think there's the other theme, like you were talking about, how we kind of fall into our environment. I guess fall, yeah, I guess fall would be the right word, kind of in this Heideggerian sense, like that we fall into our environment. So I wanted to talk about that kind of aspect from the movie. See, I recently read a book. The Lucifer Effect by Philip Zimbardo. Zimbardo was a social psychologist who conducted the Stanford prison experiment in the early 1970s, and then in the early 70s, it was like this landmark and kind of seminal study in kind of the nature of evil and antisocial tendencies. Zimbardo, he's a social psychologist, not a philosopher, so it's a little different than traditional philosophy, but it's a really, really good book. I mean, it's pretty big. It's like 500 pages or something, but I recommend everybody read it. In the first half of the book, he talks about the Stanford prison experiment, and one of the interesting things is I think there was 24 people total, 12 guards and 12 inmates, and none of the inmates or guards had any mental health problems or any criminal background or anything that would lead them to sort of acting in antisocial ways. But the guards ended up being really abusive towards the prisoners. Not all. I mean, there was kind of degrees of abuse, but a lot of the guards were very, very abusive towards the prisoners. So Zimbardo came to the conclusion that we tend to overemphasize disposition in our society, and that we individual dispositions, and that we discount the situation too much that people find themselves in, like the environmental circumstances on what shapes a person or an agent's personality. Zimbardo, Zimbardo does believe in dispositions, but he just thinks we overemphasize it. I think the reason Zimbardo would say that is because I think we live in a capitalistic society, and we emphasize the individual a lot and individual responsibility, like pulling yourself up by your bootstraps or personal responsibility, which I think is very important. I'm not denying individual responsibility and personal responsibility, but I think Zimbardo is just saying we overemphasize dispositional attitudes and not enough on the situation a person finds himself in. That's not to excuse unethical behavior. I think Zimbardo is not doing that. He's just noting that we tend to be really influenced by the situation we're in. In the second half of the book, he talks about Abu Ghraib and all the abuses that happen there, and like the naked pyramids and dogs barking in the face and chronic noise, stress positions that were in solitary confinement, things like that. So Stanford prison experiment kind of touches upon similar themes, I think, in a way with Truman Show. Because it's like we just find ourselves in an environment and then we just act according to how the environment and our environment sets up our role for us, which kind of leads me to the philosopher Hannah Arendt. I don't know if you have heard of her or know about her too much, but she wrote Eichmann in Jerusalem. It's a famous book that was really controversial back in its day because she was talking about how Jewish people, or some Jewish leaders, were complicit with the Nazis in the Holocaust, and that was real, that was really controversial, And she also wrote about the banality of evil, saying that, a lot of evil doesn't happen because people are. It's not that people are all antisocial, all have antisocial personality disorder or are psychopathic. It's that people just are complicit in their environment, or they just go along with what their environment's doing. Kind of, I think, Arendt was trained under Heidegger. She was Heidegger's student, so and Heidegger's lover. But I think there's a big existential aspect to it. I think you were mentioning Plato's cave allegory, but I was thinking it's an existential thing, like it's authenticity and authenticity. And I was thinking, yeah, I think there's an authenticity and authenticity problem there. And, like I think when we're inauthentic, we just kind of fall into our environment and just kind of do whatever our environment is setting up for us. But if we choose ourselves, kind of in the, kind of in maybe a Sartrean way, not so much a Heideggerian way, then I think, there's a much less of a tendency to sort of act in kind of destructive or antisocial ways. Let's see. so, so Arendt also has another quote where um, she says, most people, she said the sad fact is that most evil is done by people who haven't chosen to be good or evil. And she just means, a nation like Germany is a nation of 40 or was a nation of 40 million people at the time of World War II. But 40 million people can't all have antisocial personality disorder. But 40 million people can just be following the norms of their society. Like in Truman Show, he was just following the norms of his environment. I remember in Truman Show there was the quote. He says, "Well, why is Truman? I think Christoph was the character's name. Why is Truman not questioning the reality he's in right now? The reality he has until now?" And then Christoph goes, "Well, that's because most of us just accept the reality we're given. So whether that reality is good or bad, I mean, contemporary America has a lot of problems, but maybe we're complicit in some of the problems, And just like in Nazi Germany, ordinary people just became complicit." There's another quote by Arendt that she says, Hitler shook the hands with Eichmann, who Eichmann shook the hands with someone else, and that other person shook the hands with someone else, who shook the hands with Heidegger, who shook the hands with me. And she just means we're all complicit to some degree in sort of, falling into our environment. So, I think a big part of, just falling into our environment too, and how like these really destructive forces happen, like in Stanford prison experiment or Abu Ghraib or Nazi Germany, is when Martin Buber, another Jewish existentialist, or another existentialist, but he was a Jewish existentialist. He wrote about the I thou relationship, and in the I thou I it relationship, it's like when people treat each other as an it instead of, and sort of, I think Buber says, if I remember, he says that was kind of like the relationship God would have with people. But a lot of times, YouTube itself is very I-it. People are real nasty to each other, and, just there's a lot of just personal attacks and just kind of general immaturity, which is unfortunate. But I don't know, sometimes the world seems not very mature. But I think, trying to, if you want, I think to lessen kind of like, Stanford prison experiments, or even situations where people are looking at Truman as an it, I think people should try to keep in mind like the I thou I it relationship. Not that it's a cure-all, but I think, if people looked at Truman as an actual person instead of like just an object for a TV show, and I think, or whatever the situation is, I think there could be far less suffering in this world. So I think, let's see here. The last thing I wanted to say was, there's one more great movie I think that I want to mention. The Reader, with Kate Winslet, which was made in 2008, I think, which is a really great film. And she was a Nazi prison guard. And after the war, I think like 6 years after the war, they're putting her on trial for her crimes, or just Nazis in general, because there was a lot of German guilt. And then so the not and so the so then I don't they weren't able to round up all the Nazi criminals or guards. But then the judge, she's on trial, and the judge goes to her, asks her like, "Why did you do what you did? And well, how could you do all these terrible crimes?" And then Kate Winslet character says, "Well, what would have you have done?" And I think that's a really great question. What would have you have done given if you were in that same environmental circumstances I was in? How would have you have acted? If you were in really terrible circumstances, how would you act? And I think most of us, most of the time, just unreflectively go along with our environmental situation. And I think, what would have you have done if you were in a really horrible circumstance, whether it's, in Rwanda or Nazi Germany or, or even the 2008 financial meltdown? How would have you acted if you were in a really bad circumstances is a really good question. And like in the Truman Show, I mean, he just went along for the most part. But then, like, true man, he became authentic. Like, he was truly being himself. That's what I got kind of out of that statement you were saying there. But anyways, I think, we have to be really cognizant of, excuse me, or we have to attempt to be really cognizant of why we're acting the way we act. And I think, and I think, if we can do that, we can kind of fight against our sort of baser instincts, whatever our situation is. I mean, because all environments are going to have their kind of cost-benefit analysis kind of thing. So anyways, yeah, I like your videos a lot, and I thought it was really good and interesting kind of parallel you were making there. Anyways, thank you. Bye.